Shalom, friends. Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson here, Dean of the Ziegler School at American Jewish University. Some of you know that I have already written and published a letter to non-Jews explaining what it's like to be Jewish in these times. I wrote a letter and a video to my Palestinian friends and to their defenders. And now, perhaps most delicately of all, I need to turn to my people. I need to speak to Israelis and to Jews and to our defenders to help mobilize us to hold on to hope, to do the work of self-defense, but also to preserve a path to a future that allows us to thrive and allows our neighbors to thrive so that all people can participate in that better tomorrow. These words are delicate and difficult, and I want to start out by saying I know that I am no expert in security, in military affairs. I am a rabbi, and that means that my charge is to take the harvest of Jewish morality and ethics, our sacred literature, and to apply it to the issues of our day. There is surely no more pressing question than this one right now. And so I open with the words of this week's Torah portion as Judah speaks to his brother and says, Vayomer bi Adonai, Yidaber na avdecha davar ba'oznei Adonai. Let your servant, I beg you, speak words in your ears. As Israel pursues the just cause of its own defense, having been assaulted brutally and unconscionably by Hamas crossing over its border, assaulting its civilians, raping women, murdering children, grandparents, ruthlessly and without exception, and still now holding 100 hostages, civilians who deserve their freedom. I want to remind us that the military is essential to be able to achieving certain short-term goals. Those goals, in my mind, mean bringing the hostages home. They mean preventing any future border crossing attacks such as what occurred. It means disabling the billion-dollar Hamas military infrastructure of tunnels and weaponry throughout the area. It means stopping the ongoing flow of arms and money to foster terrorist attacks and the terrorist ideology. And it means to do the work of eventually opening up the possibility of some self-governance in the West Bank and Gaza that does not involve Hamas or terror. But at the same time, and here's the tricky part, my friends, at the same time, we also have our own work to do. I believe as a rabbi that the strategic and the moral work hand in hand towards shared long-term goals, which is our thriving and the thriving of our neighbors. You cannot have one without the other. And that means how do we do the work now to make sure that we survive in the short term and thrive in the long term? And for that, I want to remind us that there's a rich Jewish tradition of just war theory. How does one conduct a war ethically, and what are the ethical goals one hopes to attain? The first that we need to focus on is to continue the work and expand the work of reducing civilian casualties. There have been so many Palestinian deaths and injuries. Indeed, there have been so many Israeli deaths and injuries. All need to be reduced to the maximum extent of our capability. Whatever we can do, and this is not just the responsibility of Israel, this is the responsibility of Hamas and Hezbollah and the Palestinian Authority. But what we can do from our side to be able to ensure that civilian casualties are minimized remains a mandate that we must follow. Second, we need to ensure that there are adequate supplies of food, water, medicine for the civilians in Gaza, who must be terrified right now, living under such a brutal reign of Hamas, and then the consequences of Israel defending itself. And so, because we can, we have an obligation. I'm aware that that obligation is shared by the Arab countries in the region, by Hamas and Hezbollah, by the Palestinian Authority, but the fact that they may not be stepping up to their duty doesn't mean we should not be stepping up to ours. And then in addition to those two short-term goals that need to be implemented now, we also need to be doing the work of assuring tomorrow. And that means that eventually, not now, but eventually, the only solution will be two people living side by side, both with security and dignity. And to be able to achieve that now, when there is no one to turn over the occupation to, we need to be occupying in a way that maximizes that optimal future. So that involves, to my mind, first of all, equal law applied equally. That means anybody who burns down anybody's harvest should be prosecuted, tried, and sentenced, and they should do time, whether they are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Israeli, Palestinian. It doesn't matter who the victim is, and it doesn't matter who the criminal is. That's a great innovation of Torah law. The crime itself is what matters. So anybody who is destroying other people's property or crops or homes or cars should be arrested, prosecuted, sentenced, and serve time. That applies also to those who attack farmers, villages, playgrounds. All of that requires equal prosecution under law. There needs to be greater work to provide access to quality education, to health care, to jobs that allow for income. People need to be able to live with hope, and hope requires being able to feed their families and to be able to live with dignity. Towards that end, there has to be greater work to give access to modifying residential units so that Palestinian families can live in their own homes with their own children. There have to be administrative processes in place to be able to process those requests fairly and safely, with an eye both to security but also to dignity. There needs to be dignity in the border crossing. The way people are handled as they get their jobs is really, really crucial to their sense of who Israel is in the region and in their lives. And then there have been calls, and I want to come out in support of that, for a Marshall Plan, not only for Gaza, but for the West Bank and for Israel as well. Maybe the world's nations can lead the way to making sure that funds are used for their intended purposes, rather than being siphoned off by Hamas and Hezbollah, that they're used for the benefit of the civilians within Gaza, within the West Bank, and within Israel, so that they are all able to thrive and that all the boats rise. Last, I want to remind all of us that there are four key things to remember. Israel and Israelis are not going anywhere. They have a right to security, peace, and dignity, and we will have it. 2, Palestine and Palestinians aren't going anywhere. They also have a right to dignity and peace and security and a future. They're not going anywhere. There is no long-term military solution. There are essential things that the military can establish now. I've talked about that. But long-term, the only way to move forward is for us to speak to each other, honor each other, to listen to each other, and then find ways to live together, side by side, in our own security and in our own democratic nations. Don't give up hope, friends. Don't walk away. Don't turn this into a one side has to lose for one side has to win. Israel and Palestinians all deserve hope and a tomorrow of peace. Shalom.